Okay, let's start with chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami, dhammam saranam gacchami, sangham saranam gacchami, dutiyampi buddham saranam gacchami, dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami, dutiyampi sangham saranam gacchami, tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami, tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami, tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. Panatipata virmani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Adinādana virmani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Kāmesu miccācārā virmani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Musāvādā virmani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Suramēraya majjapamādhatthāna virmani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Itipiso bhagavā arahant sammā sambuddho vidyācarana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhammasārthi sattā deva manussānam buddho bhagavāti sakkhato bhagavata dhammo sanditthiko akaliko ehipassiko opanayiko paccattam vedittabbo viññohiti. Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho ujjupatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho ñāyapatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho Sāmīci patipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho yadidam chattari purisa yugani atta purisa puggala esa bhagavato sāvaka sangho Ahuneyo pahuneyo dakhineyo anjali karaniyo anuntaram punyakhitam lokam sati sadhu sadhu sadhu. Now let's take a couple of minutes to bring our attention to the present moment. Understanding your sitting posture, the way you are seated. Feeling the presence of the self in this peaceful atmosphere. Taking a few deep inhalations and exhalations, some long, mindful and gentle breaths, releasing any tension and negative energies from your body. Experiencing each breath throughout the body. You may bring your total attention to your inner experience. As you breathe in and out gently and naturally, being very friendly to yourself and being very gentle to yourself, you may cultivate some loving friendliness, wishing yourself, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be relaxed, may I be peaceful. Being very happy about this very moment, your spiritual practice, your Dhamma practice, feeling these positive energies within yourself, feeling the deep sense of connectedness with yourself, with your body and mind. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so let's start our Dhamma discussion. So today I selected the Bhavānga Sutta, the luminous mind. It is in the Anguttara Nikaya. This is about the mind. Even though this sutta, this discourse is very short, as you can see, it has only 2 verses. Okay. Pabasara midam bhikkhave cittam tanchako agantukehi upakkilesehi upakkilittam. Pabasara midam bhikkhave cittam tanchako agantukehi upakkilesehi vippayuttam. So that is how it is in Pali language. So here is the translation. The luminous ones is the mind, and it is defiled by incoming defilements. The uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person doesn't discern that as it actually is present, which is why I tell you that for the uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person, there's no development of the mind. That is the first one. Okay. The second one, the luminous ones is the mind, and it is freed from incoming defilements. The well-instructed disciple of the noble ones discerns that as it actually is present, which is why I tell you that for the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones, there's development of the mind. So this is all about the sutta, the discourse. But these two stanzas are very popular, very famous in the entire Tipitaka, the Pali canon, because it explains some philosophical, spiritual aspect of this mind. Okay. As we know, in general, Buddha's entire teachings are centered around the cultivation or the development of the mind. If you can remember the very first verse of the Dhammapada, the handbook of Buddhists, it directly talks about the nature of the mind. Mano pubbangama dhamma, mano setta manoya. Manasache paduttena bhasatiwa karotiwa. Tatonam dukkhamanveti chakkama vatopada. What it simply tells us is that mind is the forerunner, mind is the chief, and everything is mind-made eventually. Therefore, if anyone speaks or acts upon negative intention, evil intentions, the suffering will follow. The opposite, mind is the forerunner, mind is the chief, and everything is mind-made. Therefore, if anyone acts or speak upon positive or wholesome intentions, the happiness, the tranquility or the peace will follow. So this is how the entire teachings begin. So therefore, it is very appropriate for us to understand what this mind is. What are the components about the mind? What it exactly is, and how it is functioning in our everyday life, and even how the functioning of the mind is responsible or relevant to what we are eventually going through. To be happy or to be sad, tensed, anxious, frustrated, or whatever it is. So we all know the final outcomes. So therefore, it is very important for us to understand how this mind works. So when we look at the teachings, the entire Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, is all about understanding this mind and how to cultivate it in the right way. So there are so many discourses, stanzas, where Buddha happened to talk about the mind. Very different, subtle, deep aspects to our mind. So sometimes, most commonly, it is known as the consciousness, right? It's a very common term, how we interpret, how we understand the mind, which is the consciousness. So these are very controversial topics and ideas to talk about, right? Because mind is not a material object. And we know it is right in between, right within this body. We call it the psychophysical entity, right? Body and mind. So it is somewhere. It is somewhere within this body. It has to be. So we all commonly understand something beyond this physical body, physical experience. There's no doubt. Even though we cannot feel it, I mean, we cannot touch it, we cannot locate it, identify it as an object. We all experience it. We all experience in different ways at different times, as we are going through many different mental experiences, right? So, therefore, we cannot simply deny that. We cannot simply forget about this mental aspect of our experience. So, there are so many ideas, so many thinking about what is this mind. Sometimes it is explained, mind is just the working of this physical body, or you may call it the brain. The working of the brain itself is identified as the mind or the consciousness. So it is not clear, it's still confusing to understand what this mind is and where is it, how it works. So, but after all, we all have to understand it somehow. It is our responsibility because we are the ones who are going to experience the eventual consequences, results, the working of this body and mind. So therefore, it is very important to understand the mechanism of this mind, how it works. Okay, and even what is our responsibility in understanding and maintaining this mind in a positive way, in a healthy way, or in a spiritual way. Okay, so even though we learn about the mind in different ways, this particular discourse actually talks about a very philosophical aspect to it. Okay, so when you look at the stanza, the luminous monks is the mind, and it is defined by incoming defilements. So initially it says luminous monks is the mind, the original or the default quality or the nature of our mind is luminous, or it is pure, it is radiant, as Buddha explains. And that is what we commonly know as the Buddha nature even, right? That is what we identify as the Buddha nature. We all are born with that. Okay? We all are born with that luminous mind, radiant mind. That is the original default state or the quality of this mind or the consciousness. But what happens? It is defiled by incoming defilements, right? So it's very simple, very easy to understand. When the baby is born to this world, right? We commonly know that mind of a baby to be very pure, very clean, or perhaps it's radiant. So we can see that when you look at a baby, the baby's face, how the baby is smiling, even wiggling, right? So babies are smiling not only from their lips or the faces, right? How they smile. In all over themselves, their body, we can see that. That is the purity, that's the radiant quality of the mind. Because it is uncontaminated, undefiled yet. That's why even we all like to see babies. You never get fed up watching a baby. What do you think? What do you think? Is that true? It is, right? Because of that nature, because of that pure quality, the radiant quality of these babies, right? But what happens as they grow up? As they learn so many things from their parents, they learn so many different things about the environment. What are these objects around them? The different shapes, colors. Even within a short time, they begin to feel different feelings, emotions, even, right? It's very obvious. So this is how these external feelings, sensations, ideas, thinking are coming to them as a learned experience, right? Learned experience. And even in that early age, we can see that, when you see that there are a couple of babies, infants around even, you can easily see that how they even feel jealousy about the next one, the other one, when they play with toys. We can see these very complex emotions are even begin to happen. Sometimes you have not taught these things to them. It's very complex reality to observe. How these things are experienced in a little infant. It's very complex. So we can see that little by little, as they learn from the environment, especially from the mom, they develop these thoughts, intentions, feelings. So these are what develops in time, getting more complex, more complicated. So these are the defilements from the external world, as infants are beginning to interact with the external world through the senses. So this is how they begin to make sense out of the environment. This is how they begin to learn the world. So this is how they develop these defilements gradually, little by little. And we know that process, right? Little by little, as they age in time, how these defilements get well established in their mind, in their consciousness, and they manifest in their behavior, right? So this is the normal process. So this is what Buddha explains here. Even though we all get this luminous mind, pure state of radiant mind as we are born to this world, as we communicate with the external world, this mind in time gets contaminated or defiled. Okay, and then Buddha says the uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person. So uninstructed person means who has no any idea about how the mind works, what are the aspects of it, and even how the mind is responsible eventually for everything what we are going through, who does not have any idea about it, any knowledge, any wisdom. So that is the uninstructed, unlearned person. The run-of-the-mill person is a special term explains in the Dhamma. The meaning of that term, the run-of-the-mill person, is the one who travels through this existence again and again, being part of this circle of birth and death, getting caught up in that circle. So we know that process, how it takes place. As a result of unending craving, desire, in emotions, we all go through this circle of birth and death again and again until we attain enlightenment. So the run-of-the-mill person is the one who is traveling through this existence. So uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person doesn't discern that as it actually is present. So that person, uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person, does not understand things as they are, their real nature, or the true Dhamma, the real meaning of this body and mind, their experience, how things happen, have no idea. They don't have that proper understanding, which is why I tell you that for the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person, there's no development of the mind. So the development of the mind therefore implies that our mind to be free from these defilements, mental defilements, or the mental impurities. In the Dhamma, in the teachings, we call them the kilesa, in Pali. So they are the mental impurities. So these mental impurities are commonly known as lobha, dosa, and moha, greed, hatred, and delusion. So these are the root causes of all mental impurities or defilements. So this is how this luminous, radiant mind gets contaminated by, as we interact with the external world through our senses. So it's a long story when you talk about it, right? How these things happen to us, right within the psychophysical experience, including everything involving with every single part of this body and mind, right? As we know, the brain, our chemical reactions in our body, the hormones, everything is involved in that process. So that's where we develop these different mental impurities, okay? And we learn this process when we learn about the dependent origination, the paticca-samuppada, how things happen, right? So we don't have to go to that direction here because we have another topic to talk about. But that is the normal process of creating or having these mental impurities within this process, okay? So when the person does not understand how these things work, how this mind, how this body, the mechanism of the psychophysical experience, that person easily gets caught up in these emotions or the mental impurities, okay? And the second one, the luminous mind is the mind and it is freed from incoming defilements. So what it means is somewhat confusing, complicated. So superficially it sounds like our pure consciousness does not get contaminated by these conditions. Our original default mind is unattached or uncontaminated by these external objects. But it is not the case here. We have to carefully understand that the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones discerns that as it actually is present. So the well-instructed disciple, that means the disciple of the Buddha, one who is trying to discipline in this spiritual path, spiritual journey, as a well-instructed person, knowing enough Dhamma, knowing enough teachings to investigate through this body and mind its experience, to simply explain that, to understand how suffering comes to us, how happiness is coming to us, what is this process, how these things happen, in a deeper, subtle level, going into some very practical but deeper levels, beyond this superficial level of this experience, right? So one who has that type of intention, background knowledge, that person tries to investigate through this process, this experience. So as a result of that training, that discipline, the spiritual practice, as that person develops the necessary spiritual faculties or the qualities, that person eventually becomes able to see things as they are, how these things happen, okay? Which is why I tell you that for the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones, there is development of the mind. Only for such a person, there is a development of the mind. So the development of the mind is when our mind is free from these negative mental impurities. So it is identified as a developed mind. So it's a very common teaching, common understanding that what makes us suffer is these mental impurities. So therefore the purpose of this spiritual practice, the journey, is to free our mind from these mental impurities, defilements. Therefore the entire teachings, this spiritual path, especially the Noble Eightfold Path, is focusing on this ultimate purification of the mind. Okay. But here, what I want you to think about is the original nature of the mind. What is this luminous mind? What is this radiant quality of the mind? Okay, so you can read it through on your own because we don't have much time to go through it, but I like to bring your attention to this very practical, very important idea about this luminous mind. So this luminous mind is known as the bhavanga-citta. It's good to remember this term, bhavanga-citta. Citta is the mind. Bhavanga is a special term that talks about this luminous mind, the original or the default state of this mind, the consciousness. Okay, so very interestingly, we don't see that term in entire sutras, discourses of the Buddha, but that term comes in the Abhidhamma, the later, the deeper commentaries to the Dhamma, is known as the Abhidhamma, the deep Dhamma. There comes this term as bhavanga-citta. Okay, the momentary mental state between periods. So it's really confusing, but I want to bring your attention to understand this point very simply. Okay, without making it so complicated. This is how it can be easily understood. Okay, so the original nature, this is what we have to understand, the default quality of our mind. So I always take this example to explain this pure state of mind, right? So we know the water, the pure water, right? The quality of the pure water. So what would be some characteristics of pure water?
Transparent, you can see through.
Transparent, that's exactly, indeed, right? You can see through it, right? If it is clear, or even if it is still, you may not even see the water, right? That much it is penetration. You can see through it, right? So that is the original quality of the pure water. Okay, but what can be happening to that pure water? You can add anything to it, right? You can add any condition to this pure water, any color, suppose, right? Any color, any taste, or whatever it is, you can add any quality to this pure water. But we can see then, you can no longer see through it, right? Soon after something is added to this pure water, that radiant or the seen through quality, that transparency is gone. That quality is no longer there. Okay, but remember, the original quality of the pure water, what do you think about it? Is it still there or not?
Yes.
The pure quality of the pure water
This is still there.
is still there, no matter what you add to it, right? No matter how contaminated this pure water, that quality, the original quality of the pure water is still there. The beauty of it is that you can even get it still. How?
It's still clean.
Maybe distill it or purify it, maybe boil it. So there are so many methods, so many ways to do it, to get that pure quality back, right? So now you get the idea, right? If you think about it, if you think about this example, it is just like this pure mind. This is the best example I can think of to explain this original beauty, the radiant, the luminosity of the mind. As I explained earlier, how we interact with the external world as we develop these different defilements, mental impurities, this pure quality of our nature, radiant quality of our mind gets contaminated. And then what happens? It loses its radiant, pure, soothing, so relaxing, peaceful quality. Right? It's not that complicated to understand that. Right? But the beauty, just like the pure water, no matter what you add to it, right? In our mind also, that original nature, the original peace or the radiant can be achieved. We can gain our peaceful mind back, because no matter what mental impurities are added to our consciousness, the mind, its pure nature is still there. Okay? Its radiant quality is still within our mind, the consciousness. That's why it is possible for us to go back to our original peace, that Buddha nature that we all are born with. So as we know these mental impurities, we know the process. Just like the distilling or other methods of purifying the water, there are certain ways of purifying our mind, cleansing of our mind also. Right? So that is what we explained earlier. The Buddha's entire teaching, his spiritual path is to gain that original peace of our mind, the tranquility of our mind. So in the teachings we learn these techniques as Sila, Samadhi and Panya, as it is explained in the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay? As we cultivate the morality, the self-discipline, which is the controlling of the most outer level of our emotional agitations, and the Samadhi practice, which is the cultivation of the mind by controlling our emotions from arising in our mind, in our consciousness, through meditation practice, tranquilizing meditation practice. And then by cultivating the wisdom, the Panya, we eradicate all mental impurities without hiding them, without suppressing them, going into their original nature, their true mechanism, how these things are happening, investigating them according to the Dhamma, understanding their real nature. We completely eradicate these mental impurities, defilements with Panya, with the wisdom, that they never come back. So this is the process of unlearning this contaminated process of our mind. Okay. So with that example, we can easily understand the original nature of our mind and how is it possible for us to go back to find our original peace, the tranquility of our mind. Okay. And also another important example is the mirror. Okay. So I will come back to it later. So that is how we explain the function of this original mind, the peaceful mind in this spiritual practice, the spiritual awakening. Okay. Sometimes in the Dhamma, as it explains, this uncontaminated or unconditioned mind to be the most purified state of this spiritual path, spiritual development. When our mind is free from all these conditions, that is where we reach the most powerful, most tranquil, concentrated, peaceful mind. But at the same time, we talk about cultivating necessary qualities. So what is the confusion there? Contradiction there. So we talk about two things at the same time. We talk about emptying our mind, and at the same time we talk about cultivating, having some positive qualities in the mind. So it's a kind of contradiction here. So we have to carefully understand that as we talk about the process of unlearning of these mental impurities, we have to do some practice. We have to cultivate some necessary qualities in order for us to reach that pure state of mind. So that's where the Buddha explained about well-instructed, noble disciple, one who understands the importance of understanding and developing or purifying this mind. That person has to cultivate some necessary spiritual qualities, right? So when you think about even understanding the mind, right, how complex that is, it's not easy. Even though we think that we have a mind, we have a body, for many people, whenever they try to observe their mind, they totally get lost. They don't find it, they don't feel it, they don't know where to focus, right? So they can get really confused in meditation, right? So there must be some mechanism for that. There should be some proper techniques to observe the mind, understand the mind, the mechanism of it. So that's where we need to cultivate some necessary qualities. So that's where we talk about the 5 spiritual faculties: saddha, virya, sati, samadhi, panya, confidence, right effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. All these spiritual qualities are needed to understand the mind, to understand the working of the mind, and also to discipline this mind, to control our emotions. These spiritual qualities are needed. I call them the spiritual dynamics. There are so many different dynamics, right? Aerodynamics, biodynamics, right? So this is what the physical therapies are talking all about, right? How this body works, right? So how the spiritual experience, the spiritual world is maintained is through understanding and maintaining these necessary spiritual dynamics. So these are the components, qualities of that dimension. Without these conditions, one may not be able to easily move forward in this spiritual path. So when these qualities are cultivated, that person becomes very sensitive to the mind. So this is the problem for many people. To understand the mind, even to feel the mind, our mind has to come to a certain level, right? We cannot focus on our mind with a disturbed mind, with a distracted mind. That is not a state to easily observe our mind mindfully. So we can see that. To be able to feel, to be able to watch our mind, we should be at a certain level of peace. That's what we try to achieve through relaxation techniques, right? Even you cannot achieve that with a disturbed body. Even if you find your body being restless, you cannot simply focus your mind, right? So this is the connection. This is the relationship between the body and mind. They both are very important in that experience. To be able to easily feel our mind, our consciousness, what is going through our mind at this moment. It is not that easy. That's why we need to cultivate some necessary steps, necessary spiritual qualities. That's what we cultivate within the meditation practice. So when we do that, when we have these necessary preliminary works done, we easily feel it, we easily observe it. So when we cultivate our mind, this is the way to understand the mind in order for us to achieve such a peaceful mind which is free from all these mental impurities or any other defilements. So when we learn about the jhanas, deep absorptions, especially when our mind is free from 5 hindrances, these superficial distractions, mental disturbances, that is how our mind gets into very peaceful, soothing, very joyful state. So we can see that it is just by emptying the mind, purifying the mind from these defilements, not having them. So we can see, even though in the teachings it is appreciated to have an empty mind, we cannot deny that we are supposed to cultivate these necessary mental qualities at the same time. So this is the connection there. So therefore there's no chance for us to get confused in that point. Okay? And then especially in the Vatthupama Sutta, if you can remember, we spoke about so many different layers of mental impurities in our human behavior, right? As we cultivate in time, within ourselves, as we interact with the world, with relationships and everything. If you think about your everyday life, we go through so many negative experiences and we develop so many different mental impurities. So in the teachings, these mental impurities are categorized, explained in so many different levels, in so many different ways. But eventually, the common nature of all these mental impurities to go through tension, anxieties, and restlessness, eventually all these suffering, negative state of experience. That is the common nature of these mental impurities. So that is why the purpose of the teachings is to completely purify our mind from these defilements. Okay. And then there's another important thing to mention. Okay. This is a very interesting part of this topic. When we talk about the bhavanga-citta, right? I mentioned earlier that we all are having this luminous nature of the mind as we are born, as human beings. Okay, this is a very special state. When we talk about the evolution of the consciousness, human life is considered a highly evolved state of consciousness, unlike other beings like animals, hungry ghosts, or beings in the hell. So they are still evolving in this direction. But human life is considered as a highly evolved consciousness. That's why a Buddha is possible only in the human realm, human world. Okay? So, even though we all have this consciousness, even though we all have this bhavanga-citta, going back to that term, it is different from person to person. When you think about the quality of this bhavanga-citta, okay, how it happens to us to be born differently. this is where our own karma comes in action. Okay? We are the products of our own individual karmas in this samsaric journey, in this existence. Okay? So we are always born with a certain karma. We call it the janaka karma. A special karma conduces you to give birth in a suitable birth or suitable life. They are called the janaka karma. We all are born as a result of this karma. Okay? So when these karmas are performed, we perform these karmas also differently, depending on our characters, our behaviors, our predispositions, and all these things, our environment even, maybe our educational knowledge, intellectual levels, understanding, and all these things. We perform different karmas in different levels. Okay? And then when we are born as individuals, that makes the difference. We are born differently. Okay? But when you think about the consciousness or the bhavanga-citta, that luminous mind, that is also different from person to person in its quality. In its quality, in a way that you can understand how powerful that mind or the bhavanga-citta. Okay, how it happens is in this way. In the Abhidhamma, it is explained about a special karma, a special type of karmas. Okay, they are called the tihetuka kusala karma. Okay, tihetuka kusala karma means there are three conditions pertaining to a particular karma or action. So, what three conditions? Somanasa sahagata. Somanasa sahagata means you perform that action with a pleasant mind, with a happy mind, joyful mind. Okay? That is the first condition. The second, jnana sampayukta. That means you perform that action out of wisdom, with a better understanding. Why you do it, the consequence even. You know the consequence of it even. Okay? So that can be different depending on your knowledge of the Dhamma, the teachings, your common sense, common understanding. All these things matter. You know, how you perform that action with a better understanding. That is the second condition. Third, asankarika. That means without a guidance of someone else. That means that karma, that action has to perform genuinely. Genuinely means from your own intentions. Okay? So, any positive action based on these three conditions, somanasa sahagata, jnana sampayukta, asankarika, with a happy mind, led by proper thinking or wisdom, and from your own genuine intention, led by your own interest. So if any positive action performed by these three conditions, that positive karma is known as a very powerful karma. Very powerful karma. If someone is born out of this type of karma, that person is going to be a genius. That person is going to be a very unique person, very different from others. Okay, so this is what we identify as the tihetuka kusala karma. Not everyone is born with such a karma. Sometimes only two conditions are there for certain people to be born out of. Okay, so that person is not going to be that powerful, that genius in that sense. Okay, So if a person is born with such a powerful karma, as a result of their powerful karma, that person is going to have a very powerful bhavanga-citta mind. So what's the difference of such mind? What's the difference of such a bhavanga-citta is just like a mirror. This is how I explain that. It's a very common general experience for us, right? To look in the mirror every day, right? Basically, we look in the mirror to see our reflection in it. So think about the mirror to understand this point. The function or the uniqueness of this powerful bhavanga-citta, this consciousness, okay? But when you think about a mirror, when you look in the mirror, there are different mirrors, right? What makes the difference in these mirrors? Some mirrors have a lot of dust in them. Some mirrors have very different big spots on them. And some mirrors are even cracked. And some mirrors are even crooked. They have some waves, kind of surface. What happens when you look in such mirrors? Yes, you don't see the proper image of yourself, right? It's a distorted picture, image in the mirror. Okay, so we know that condition. What makes that condition, right? So the bhavanga-citta is just like that. Even though we all are born with this bhavanga-citta, depending on our own karmas that we have performed in our previous life, we gain a different mirror. We get a different bhavanga-citta. So our mirrors are sometimes having a lot of dust in them. You cannot even see through at all. Some mirrors are dirty. Some mirrors are contaminated by this dust. Sometimes some mirrors, some bhavanga-cittas are having some hard to remove spots, like very powerful emotions, some very powerful habits sometimes, routines, maybe predispositions, right? Some conditions are coming through our existence even. You have no clue of having them in this life. Sometimes they are coming from our previous lives, as we have following them for a long, long time. There are certain conditions like that. And some mirrors are even cracked. Some mind, some consciousness, some bhavanga-cittas are very disturbed, contaminated by different conditions, different reasons. Sometimes these minds, bhavanga-cittas, can be restless, disturbed, scattered, contaminated with so many conditions. So what happens? Whatever comes in front of such a mirror, such a bhavanga-citta, would it give you a better reflection? What do you think? If your bhavanga-citta is that disturbed mirror, whatever comes in front of that mirror would not give you the proper reflection. That is what it said here. Not to see things as they really are. You see a distorted image, reflection. Whatever comes in front of this mirror, disturbed, contaminated, distracted bhavanga-citta, it does not give you the proper reflection. It is being contaminated by so many powerful conditions, emotions, mental impurities, habits, dispositions, things like that. So, you don't see things as they are. You don't see through them. You don't see the real Dhamma in any of these experiences. So, any experiences means basically whatever you come in contact with these five senses or the six senses, ears, eyes, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself as the mind objects. So you don't see these things as they really are, how these things are happening in reality, in the truth. But you always see a distorted story, disturbed story behind them. You don't see through them. So that is the way to separate. That is the way to get more confused, complex in this story, this drama itself. But as a result of having a perfect mirror, okay, if your bhavanga-citta to be very sensitive, very refined, very well focused, very sharp, whatever comes in front of such a mirror, such a bhavanga-citta, it gives you the proper, perfect reflection. And that is seeing the things as they really are. That's a different mind. That's a special mind. That is what we call that powerful bhavanga-citta. To be genius in this, when you talk about in a spiritual way, when our consciousness, our bhavanga-citta is very well developed, very concentrated, very purified, that mind is very sensitive to this ultimate truth, the reality that comes in the Dhamma, to basically to understand, to completely realize the true meaning of this anicca, dukkha, anattma, the impermanence, the suffering, unsatisfactoriness, and the reality of non-self. These are very subtle, deep realities. Not superficial people with a contaminated mind, disturbed mind can easily understand. To understand the true meaning of them, we should have a very refined, very pure, very sharp, sensitive mind. That is the meaning of having a powerful bhavanga-citta. So how it happens? It happens as a result of our own karma. If we are to have that powerful state of mind by birth, right? Do we have a control over that? No, we don't have that control now. We are born, right? So we are just functioning as normal human beings. We don't have any power to go back and correct anything in the past, right? How we were born and even what happens at the birth, or how we experience our mind, our consciousness, the bhavanga-citta, we don't have any clue, right? But there's a possibility. When you know the theory of karma, how it works, some people are born in that way. Okay? Especially when you think about enlightened beings, in their final birth, they all are born with these powerful karmas, because that is going to be their final birth. Somehow they have to attain the enlightenment. They have to end this journey. So there should be a certain level, predispositions in their consciousness to be able to deeply understand this Dhamma. So when they are born with such a mind, such a powerful bhavanga-citta, even during the Buddha's time, very important, very interestingly, that some kids even attained enlightenment when they were 7 years old. Can you imagine? You cannot explain that, but that is how it works. there are genies like that even today, right? I mean, not like the spiritually, but there are kids like that. So we hear these things from time to time. There are kids like that, babies like that, right? They are born very special. So in this spiritual community, in the Buddha's dispensation, we see these kind of cases, these kind of individuals in the history. Mostly all these enlightened beings are born with such a quality as they are born. The other important thing to keep in mind, we all need to remember that state of mind can be achieved. How? Through practice. This is the most important thing. It doesn't mean that we all have to be born with a very powerful, perfect bhavanga-citta to be highly spiritual people. But if we cultivate, if we practice the Dhamma, if we cultivate these necessary spiritual qualities with enough effort, better understanding, applying all these necessary practices into our daily life, there's a possibility for us to reach that level through practice. Otherwise, we would not be able to attain enlightenment or reach any higher spiritual level within this life. So, very importantly, Buddha says that it is possible for anyone. It is possible for anyone at any time. Even within this very lifetime, one can attain enlightenment if following the proper technique, proper spiritual path, proper guidance. It is possible. So now you have the idea of the real functioning of the bhavanga-citta and how it is different from person to person depending on their own individual level of the karma, and how it is related to our spiritual path, spiritual awakening. And then it is evident that the purpose of this spiritual practice is to cultivate that state of mind, necessarily going back to the original peace or the radiant, tranquil state of our mind that we all are born with. Okay. That is the purpose of this spiritual practice. But finally, we need to keep in mind, when you talk about the bhavanga-citta in this way, it is assumed that there's a permanent existence of such a mind. That's a very subtle thing to keep in mind. Why? Because in the early texts, many discourses of the Buddha, we learn that Buddha denies of a permanent existence of a consciousness or a mind. Even read the Bhavānga-citta, what we just explained now. There's no such a thing as a permanent existence. Even within our consciousness, mind, Bhavānga-citta, there's no any permanent existence. How we understand that? It's a process. It's a process. Having a causal reality, causes and effects. But when we think about our samsaric journey, the existence, how it is explained in the Dhamma as nacha so nacha anyo. When you are born again, that's not you, and you are not even someone else. And that is our own responsibility in a way. That process, for that process we are responsible. We are responsible for that process. So if there's no such a thing, I don't think a Buddha is possible. Because we learn that to be a Buddha, one has to complete these necessary spiritual qualities up to their perfection level, which is not achieved within one lifetime. in our Buddha's case, he happened to be born millions of lives, completing these necessary spiritual qualities up to the perfection level, right? So if there's no such a kind of ownership, right, for these karmas that we are performing, accumulating, there's no spiritual progress. We cannot think about anything like that, right? So it's a kind of accumulation of these spiritual qualities, like assets. You know, when we cultivate it, when you cultivate these spiritual qualities, suppose in this very lifetime, if we are not enlightened in this life, if you are born again, you are born with that potential. Still, you carry through these positive qualities that you are cultivating here. And that is what we are trying to maintain until we attain the enlightenment. So therefore, we have to carefully understand these subtle, deep points when we learn the Dhamma, not to get confused, right? So that is about the bhavanga-citta, the luminous mind that Buddha spoke about. Okay. So please remember those two examples I gave you, the pure water and the mirror. So these two examples are very helpful to understand the pure state of this original mind, the default state of mind, and how that quality can be retrieved even through the proper process by unlearning, undoing that process. And to understand the functioning of the bhavanga-citta to be easily understood using the example of the mirror. Okay. Do you have any question?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
So in the example you gave of the baby being born, the defilements stain the bhavanga-citta, you know, are learned through life,
Yes.
right? But and you know, I was wondering, like, aren't those defilements the very thing that cause us to be reborn as well? So aren't they already there when we are reborn?
Yeah, in the Dhamma, how it is explained is that these mental impurities, lobha, dosa, moha, as I explained earlier, and all other necessary mental defilements are the causes for the rebirth process. They give us a next life, another life. Okay. And what was the second part of it?
But the baby has no defilements.
Right. That is to be very carefully understood.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I was asking.
So
yes.
it is just like actually somebody came with that direct question to the Buddha. You know, when we talk about the luminous mind, when babies are not contaminated, they have not interacted with the world enough to be contaminated, they should be enlightened. Right? But Buddha's answer was, there are hidden tendencies in them that they are carrying through their previous lives as habits, these latent tendencies. That part is not gone in them. Therefore, they are not enlightened. That's what gets really motivated and activated as they begin to interact with the external world again. They have these seeds, these predispositions, right? So they are to be very powerful. That's how it is explained. But even those hidden tendencies can be completely eradicated with the proper practice of those three qualities, Sila, Samadhi and Panya, especially through the wisdom practice, even the hidden tendencies are completely eradicated.
Thinking when the Buddha was born, the last
Mhm.
time,
Yes.
the baby
Yeah.
had every power and everything pure, but still he has a long way to go
Yes.
to achieve Buddha
Yeah,
state.
yeah.
He had to
Of
work a
course.
lot to get there.
Yes. The
So-
important things to keep in mind is that transformation or the enlightenment is not going to be automatic thing. It definitely has to be through our effort, conscious effort. It will not come to us automatically as a gift. There's no such a thing. The evolution of consciousness, unlike the biological evolution, it requires our conscious involvement. The biological evolution we know, it does not require our intervention, our conscious awareness. It happens biologically, environmentally, it happens. But the evolution of consciousness, the development of our mind, is not happening like that automatically. It is through our conscious effort, right effort. So that's why even the Buddha, in his final birth, even though he was born with all these potentials, there had to be a proper process for that awakening to take place. It won't happen automatically. They all had to go through the same process. That's what we have to understand. But having done a lot of positive good karmas are the blessings. They are very helpful. That makes the difference. Some people have to struggle a lot. For some people it happens maybe within a short time. It is explained in Dhamma. Even for those enlightened ones, for some of them only one word was enough. For some, only 2 lines of a stanza were enough. For some, Buddha had to give an entire discourse. For some people, nothing worked. It happened that way.
And these days we have all the Abhidhamma, Dharma, everything written, but still we are nowhere close.
Where's the problem?
Yes, the problem is you have to cultivate that. One
That is
step
the
at a
difference.
time.
The problem is within our bhavanga-citta, our consciousness. That means our mind is not sensitive enough or maybe developed enough to see through that reality, the truth, the true meaning of even the teachings. You know, it's very interesting to think about. But if you technically understand that, you know, the mind and how it works, its functioning in terms of this spiritual awakening and how the karma even related to that, it makes sense. It sounds even logical to think about, you know. It's a process. Any other question? No? All right. Thank you very much, and all the blessings to you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.